Today I'm in a very red room, and behind me is the closest that you'll ever see me getting to Windows. I am going to be talking about PixieJS, how to get started. I'm going to spend a very short amount of time just showing you a few useful parts of the PixieJS website, and I'm also going to do some live coding that will hopefully demonstrate just a bit about what makes PixieJS really interesting to use for creative tech applications. So, believe it or not, the site is PixiJS.com. And the parts that I want to draw your attention to are under the docs section here. Guides is pretty self-explanatory, but if, like me, you are somebody that likes to read a lot of stuff and not necessarily only look at YouTube videos, this is a really great place to start because it tells you what PixieJS is, it tells you what PixieJS is not, kind of helps you to get an idea of what it's useful for, but also gives you a sense of how it's put together, what the sort of terminology is, and this can really help if you want to understand it at a deeper level. Next up is the tutorial section, and what is really great about this is that everything that is here is done in a live coding environment. So as you go through the tutorials, you get to actually run the code and you can make changes and try things out and see what the effect of those changes are. And this is an excellent way to learn PixieJS, especially in the beginning. One thing that I'd really like to draw your attention to is the API section here. You'll see that there's two versions. Version 8 is the latest one. That's the one that supports WebGPU. This is the reference section. I mention it because I sometimes forget myself where to find this. It is separate from the other docs on the PixieJS site. And this is where, if you want to see a lot of detail about specific functions or classes within PixieJS, then all the detail is sitting here. Finally, I'm going to go to the docs examples section, and this is really something that I come back to a lot. This is not just useful if you're starting out with PixieJS, but it's actually incredibly useful even if you're quite experienced and you just need a refresher on how a particular thing works, or you want to see a recommended way of doing something. With the examples, the important part is the list on the left here, where you've got categories of examples. So all the examples are grouped under categories. So you've got the basics, like how to create a container, how to make a transparent background. But then you've also got more advanced things like sprites, how to do animated sprites, how to incorporate video into your PixieJS application, how to draw text on the screen and manipulate it, how to do vector graphics and make those animated, and how to apply things like gradients and textures onto them. And also some more fundamental things like how to work with loading assets, which is really important when it comes to a web-based application like this, where you often need to wait to load certain assets, images or videos, before you can actually use them. But as promised, I'm going to do some live coding that'll hopefully show you some of the interesting features of PixieJS. So if we go to the examples, the very first one under basic is about containers. And here we're going to have a look at some of the more common things that you see in your typical PixieJS application. So you'll see at the beginning we have the creation of a new application. That's a PixieJS application. Everything goes inside there. They initialize it, they give it a background color. You can also make it a transparent background if that's more suitable in your case. And they have some convenience functions of being able to keep it resized to whatever the size of the window is. You'll see that there is a canvas. This is an HTML5 canvas that PixieJS creates automatically for you. And in this case, they've just appended it to the root of the document, of the web page. There are other cases where you might have your own canvas that you want to position and style and scale specifically within your web application. Then there are other ways of attaching PixieJS to that canvas. But in this case, this is a pretty simple way to get started. You'll see that they create a container here. I'm going to skip over that for now and just draw your attention to this await assets.load line. You'll notice that the texture for this bunny image is loaded using await assets.load, and then the URL for the image. PixieJS favors this modern JavaScript idiom where you use keywords like await. That just means that it's an asynchronous process instead of using a callback or something like that. And that means that it's very easy to see that your code will actually wait for that asset to be loaded and put into the texture before it moves on to the other lines of the code. And the other lines of the code are a simple loop that's taking this bunny image, this bunny texture, 25 times, making a sprite. And once it's positioned the sprite using these .x, .y properties, it's adding it as a child of the container. So what is the container? The container was created here. We said create a new container, and you can see that it was added as a child to the app.stage. Okay, so what's going on here? PixieJS has a concept of a scene graph. You may have come across this in other applications, mostly 3D applications, but keep in mind that this is a 2D library. It's just a hierarchical structure where things can be grouped. So at the top of it is this app.stage. That's kind of the main container for everything else. And underneath that can be other children, other components. These things are, for example, it could be a container, but it could also be, sprites, it could be video elements, it could be text, it could be vector graphics, or it could be other containers. So you can have containers within containers within containers, and so on. You'll see that there is also some animation applied here. So how does PixieJS deal with animation? The important thing to understand with animation, especially when it comes to animation inside the browser, is that you can't rely on the frame rate staying exactly the same. The browser will generally try, and PixieJS will try to run everything at 60 frames a second, but it might not be exact. If you've done animated graphics in JavaScript before, you might have seen calls to window.requestFrame. PixieJS provides its own abstractions and its own way of dealing with animation. The main thing you'll see is this concept of a ticker. And the ticker here, in this case, is just adding a function that's this part over here, which is run as often as possible, as up to 60 frames a second, but it could sometimes be at a longer interval in case the rest of your PixieJS application is very complicated or there's something else going on the website that you're making. So they provide a time parameter, and this time object has properties like delta time, and that is just the number of milliseconds that has elapsed since the previous frame. The rate of the rotation of this whole container is actually just a multiple of the delta time, the number of milliseconds since the previous frame. So by changing this number, we can make it go faster, or even much faster, or we can make it go slower. But it's always based on the amount of time that's elapsed. So that means that even if the frame rate drops for some reason, this thing is not going to go any faster. It's not going to take any longer or shorter for it to, for example, make a full rotation. If the frame rate does drop, it might become a little bit jerky, so it's not so smooth, but it will always take exactly the same amount of time. It will be moving at the same rate because it's always scaled according to the delta time. And this is something that's quite common in, especially in game engines. Something you might have noticed as I was changing this speed of rotation values is that it's updating immediately. I didn't have to click a button that said save or reload or run or anything like that. So this really is a live coding environment, and that makes it very useful to be able to learn PixieJS, but to also try things out and explore. But as promised, I said I was going to do something a little bit more useful with this live coding demonstration. So I'm going to try and apply a filter onto the container that is holding all of these bunny sprites. And I'll show you how easy it is to do that. I'm going to make a blur filter in this case. I know that there is something called a blur filter in PixieJS. Your text editor or VS Code or whatever is going to be able to autocomplete this for you a lot more easily, but I know that it's called blur filter. Here I've created the blur filter, I haven't done anything with it. A container is just a type of generic display object like everything else in PixieJS, and it has a property called filters. It's normally just an empty array like this. So if I add my filter into this list, it immediately becomes applied onto the container level. And because it's a list, it's an array, I can put multiple filters in here. In this case, I'm just doing the same blur filter twice. So now I'm blurring it once and then taking the result of that and blurring it again. Of course, it might be more useful to have a bunch of different filters happening at different stages, and the order of these things in the array determines, which one is done first and which one is done second, and so on. I can also, just to prove that these things are all display objects, I could also take exactly the same filter that I've created once, and I could apply it at the level of the bunny sprites. So these bunny.filters, I could apply it here. And you can see that immediately all the bunnies are being blurred individually in this case. Maybe not the most efficient way to do it, but it does prove the point that a display object, whether it is a container, whether it is a sprite, whether it is some vector graphics, whether it's text, whatever, is just a display object, and you can apply filters onto it. So that's a very useful thing to be able to do. And the great thing about it is that these filters are actually shaders. They are shader code that is being run on the GPU. That means that they're very high performance. You can use a lot of them, and it also means that you can write your own shaders, your own filters in a very simple way and in a very standard way. And this is one of the things that makes PixieJS really powerful. And that's it for now. Hopefully that was a good way to get started with PixieJS and give you some tools for learning more.